This is Lieutenant Wesley Cronenberg, badge number 9917, acting in the capacity of Internal Affairs Investigator for Case ID 096081. Line of duty death of Detective Reese, Robert A., badge number 1701, Precinct 12, which occurred the evening of 4th of October 2009. Today's date is the 16th of October 2009. The lieutenant spoke clearly in a dull monotone. The air of detachment in his voice was also evident in his gray-blue eyes. He continued, "This will be interview number 1 with the surviving officer involved in the October 4th incident. Would the officer please identify himself for the record?" "Foley," stated the man being addressed. He was, in fact, the only other person in the sparsely furnished, windowless, but garishly lit office. "Detective Foley, Edward R., badge number 0687, Precinct 12. He finished. "Thank you, Detective Foley," replied the lieutenant. He reached forward to the digital audio recorder standing upright on the fake mahogany desk. With a nearly imperceptible motion, he pressed the button on the device, causing the red LED to go out. With the recorder off, Wesley Cronenberg's voice took on a far more relaxed and personable tone. "Ed, listen, I know this is hard, and believe me, I want this shit to be over with as much as you do." "Yeah," Detective Foley replied almost robotically. His brown eyes were glossed over and rosy, and despite the outward appearance of his gray wool suit and silk tie, his face gave the impression of a man who may have rolled out of a storm gutter just moments before. "It's a shame what happened, and I'll be glad when it's all behind us. I'm certain you will too." If the detective agreed, he gave no outward signal of it. "Just make sure you give me the same facts as you put in the initial report, and this will be the last time we have to talk about it. Even if there's some kind of snafu, we could use your reports as testimony." He tried to exude a sense of confidence and care, which seemed all but lost on Detective Foley. Cronenberg kept his eyes on the face of the man sitting across from him, the man who appeared to be staring through him at the white-painted cinder block wall behind. Finally, Lieutenant nodded, more to himself than to his interview subject. He reached once more and activated the recorder. "Detective Foley, please state your relationship to the deceased." "Rob was," he started. "Detective Reese was my partner." "And how long had you worked with one another?" "Well, since the summer, I think. 4 years ago in 2005. "Would you briefly describe your professional relationship with the deceased?" Cronenberg had reverted to his dry, toneless voice since the recorder had come back on. Foley licked his lips, and his eyes finally met the lieutenant's face, the only actions that had thus far betrayed his near-vegetative demeanor. "Yeah, he and I worked together on a few cases. There were a lot of transfers going on, and after my old partner moved upstate, he paused. "I'm sorry, I'm not making much sense." "Please, take your time." The detective took a sip of water from the plastic tumbler on the desk and started again. "Well, Reese transferred in about the same time that Lawrence, my old partner, moved to the northern part of the state. We worked a few cases together before being assigned to the ATF, the Amber Task Force, which specialized in child abduction, conspiracy, and human trafficking, that sort of thing. We saw a bunch of cases through, maybe a half a dozen or so to convictions, and were able to squeeze some good info in the years we worked together. Shut down a few pimps, and we were able to reunite a 15-year-old missing girl with her parents once. We worked really well together." "How was your relationship on a more personal level? Did you two get along? I mean, have you ever had any serious disagreements or altercations? Well, Foley began to smile. He was always a sore loser, if that counts for anything. Would you mind explaining that further, Detective? Sure. Me and him, Reese that is, we were always making these little bets here and there. Not like gambling or anything, but like when you spend too much time with a guy, you find ways to pass the days. Mostly stuff like, what color is the next car that comes around that corner gonna be? Who's gonna win the Sixers game? Sometimes we bet on how long it would take to get through the tunnel. You know, stuff like that. And more often than not, I'd win the bets and collect in cash or lunch, and he always complained that I cheated or changed the bet at the last minute or some other BS. He chuckled. But I always made sure I squared up with him right. I'd double up the next time and we'd be straight. Now we're even, I'd tell him. It sounds like you two were fairly close. Yeah, we were. If you're ready, I'd like to go over the events of the night of the incident, Cronenberg stated stoically. Foley took another sip of the metallic city water and began. Well, we were on an abduction case. The girl, Jane Silsby. Case numbers in the report, I think. So the girl had been found safely and recovered, but the suspect fled the scene hours before. Detective Reese and I had a few ideas on where the suspect, Albert Goshen, might have run off to, but no trail to follow. We asked the girl a few questions before the rest of the boys showed up. She mentioned that she thought the suspect may have mentioned something called the Monarch in a phone call that she overheard. We were able to figure out that there was a construction project about 12 miles from the scene. There was a hotel being renovated. It had been a franchise owned by Holiday Inn that got bought by Monarch Hotels and was being renovated. We later found out that the construction was halted when the adjoining property had an independent survey done, so the hotel was half gutted and was likely to be for some weeks or even more. In any event, Reese and I figured it was worth to check the property. We skirted the warrant since the structure was between owners, and we felt we had just cause to check it out. That was in the report too. Yes, that is correct, Cronenberg stated clearly. In light of the event, Monarch Hotels did not feel compelled to press any issue regarding unlawful search. Well, yeah, we caught a break there. The detective paused, then swallowed deeply. I actually made a bet with Detective Reese, that the hotel chain would string us up for entering the property. He said that they'd let it slide under the circumstances. I guess he can't collect on that one now, though. Lieutenant Cronenberg shifted uncomfortably in his chair and cleared his throat, as if signaling for the story to continue. So, starting the detective. So we get to the hotel, the construction zone. By this time it's getting dark. It's around 6:30 p.m., and we're trying to look for any evidence of forced entry in an inactive construction site. It's almost impossible. We climbed the chain link and started sweeping the area, just looking around the perimeter, not really expecting to find anything. From what we could see, a lot of the windows and pretty much all the interior doors were missing. Some of the windows had plywood over them, but a few didn't. I took the northeast walls and he took the southwest. When we met back up at the rear of the building at approximately 7 p.m., Reese told me that he saw a light in one of the interior rooms through a missing window. He said it looked like an LED or maybe a cell phone screen. And so we decided it would be worth to take a look. So we backtracked to the east wall of the structure where I had seen a viable entry point, another uninstalled window. I had Detective Reese lead me through the structure to where he saw the light. A piece of masking tape was stuck to the drywall next to the door frame, reading 113. We flanked either side of the doorway. and there was definitely light coming from within the room. It was pale and blue-white like a cell phone screen. The room was an interior, so there were no windows leading outside. Through the doorframe was the only way out, so we announced our presence and identified ourselves as police officers. We told whoever was in there that he was trespassing, and that they had to come into the hallway with his hands above his head, fingers interlaced. You know the drill, Lieutenant. Cronenberg nodded. The guy didn't exit the room and was making strange noises, like speaking, but we couldn't understand him. At this point, I figured we were likely dealing with a standard drunken vagrant or a squatter. I'm not sure what Reese thought for sure, but I was pretty convinced that as far as finding the man who abducted Janie, this was a dead end. But we came this far, so I figured we ought to at least check the squatter out. Maybe put him in the tank overnight and send him on his way. At this point, it's probably around 7:30. The perp isn't coming out. He's slurring his words, and I just want to get this over with and get back to the case. We tell the guy that we're coming in, and that he needs to lay down on the floor, face down with his arms spread. I signal Rob, and he's going to go in first, his weapon ready, and I'll follow in case things go bad. And that's how we usually did it. At this point, Detective Foley stopped and licked his lips again. "Take your time, Ed," said the lieutenant, momentarily breaking his cold, professional demeanor. So, Reese turns into the room. He's drawing his weapon just in case, and I'm about to slip in behind him. And then a lot of stuff happened real fast. I heard this crack, and then a noise, like a sizzling noise. Then there's a bright white flash, and I just see Reese's shadow in front of me. Like his outline, the, silhouette? The lieutenant interjected. Yeah, that's it. Then everything all goes bright pink in the room, and I hear Rob shout something. It might have been a curse, or maybe not a word at all. I can't recall exactly. Then he's backing out of the room, reeling. "Reese?" "Yes, sir." He backs into me before I could get around him and into the room. Then the perp must have pushed him or kicked him, because he hit the opposite side of the hall, hard. I drew my own piece and turned back into the room. Something flies at my face and nearly blinds me. I duck and roll to my right, and when I get up, I hear the shots. It turns out the crazy son of a bitch was tossing those magnesium road flares at us. Things are bright and hot as hell. I guess he got Reese in the face with one when he came in. He tossed another at me when I tried to get in. There were 5 of them burning by the time it was all over. While Reese was blinded and prone, he either dropped his weapon or the perp disarmed him. Either way, when I entered the room, the perp had Reese's service pistol. After he knocked Rob against the hallway wall, he squeezed off 5 rounds in quick succession. I couldn't tell if Rob had been hit at first. I could still barely see from the burn of the flares, but I rolled in front of the doorway. The perp turned and took aim at me. I was able to fire before he could get a shot at me. I don't remember how many rounds I fired, but forensics told me it was 8. It all happened so damn fast. When I saw the perp drop, I stepped over to the scene and I saw. The detective's jaw began rhythmically clenching for a moment. I saw Reese with half of his fucking face torn off. It was a close-range hit. He must have died almost instantly. The perp, Albert he was pronounced dead when the coroner arrived. He bled out quickly from my shots. Thank you, Detective Foley. I know that this must have been a terrible ordeal for you. We're almost done here. Just a few more questions required for the IA report. Do you confirm that Detective Robert Reese's weapon was used against him by Mr. Goshen? Yes, sir. And there were 5 rounds fired from that weapon? Yes, sir. Well, I don't know if he had a fully loaded magazine, but I counted 5 shots. Detective Reese's wounds were fatal. In your assessment, Detective, could the detective have been saved by medical personnel? Foley's eyes were fixated on the half-empty tumbler of tap water. Sir, I'm not a medical professional. Noted. But he appeared to me to be beyond help. I'm not sure how someone can survive after losing that much brain matter, let alone blood. And Mr. Goshen, could he have been apprehended with the use of a non-lethal force? Well, I suppose anything's possible, sir. I just know that in another second or two, he would have fired upon me, without attempting to use non-lethal force. Thank you, Detective. I'm terribly sorry to have to make you experience that situation again. There is only one more question that the crime scene team had for you, then we should be done here. Sir? There are 2 pairs of footwear located at the scene, near the end of the hall where the incident occurred. A pair of steel-toe black half-work boots, size 10, and a pair of gloss black Oxfords, size 11.5. It was determined that these shoes belonged to yourself and Robert Reese. Foley's glassy eyes seemed to warm momentarily, and the corners of his mouth turned up into his stubbled cheeks. Yeah, those are our shoes. That was Rob's thing, or Detective Reese. Guy was always certain that a suspect would hear footsteps coming and could take that extra second to make a break for it. Sometimes when we were on a call or about to apprehend a suspect, he'd take his Oxfords off and urge me to do the same. No one ever did hear us sneak up, though I'm not sure if that's due to not wearing shoes, but he swore by it. Foley chuckled a bit. Thank you, Detective Foley. The lieutenant's face had softened again. That should be all. I'll let you know if there'll be any further need for your testimony, but I don't see that being necessary. Goodbye, son, and God bless. Part 2, 29th of March, 2012, 1:22 a.m. Though a phone call coming after midnight wasn't uncommon given this line of work, Edward Foley still got pissed off by unexpected late-night calls. The ringing hadn't awoken him. He had been laying awake in bed for an hour, but it was still an intrusion. He unlocked his phone and read the caller's number. When he saw the contact info on his screen, he knew he wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight, and he had known in his gut that the call would be coming sometime soon. He sat up and answered his cell. Foley here, he said, trying not to sound too annoyed. Mr. Detective Foley? It's Agnes from the Royal Hotel on East Chestnut Street. I'm sorry to bother you again, but we're having another, issue with Gerard, said the voice at the other end of the line. I figured that was the case. Can you bring me up to speed? Well, yes, of course. He checked in again last night under the names of James Cagney and paid for 3 nights in advance in cash. The girl who was on the shift last night hadn't seen Gerard before, so she didn't recognize him or push the issue of the obvious false name. Shit, Foley muttered. I'm sorry, came the reply. Nothing. James Cagney, huh? That's a nice touch, real nice. Yes, Agnes stammered uncomfortably. Well, I wanted to call the police, but I know that the last time this happened, you asked to be notified personally, and I do appreciate that. A large incident with uniformed officers and cop cars and lights is never good for business. Yeah, no problem, Foley said, pulling his boots on. Thanks for letting me know. I'll be over there in 20 minutes. You think you could keep things under control until I get there? I think so. It isn't as bad as last time yet, And Thursday's not a busy night for us. Gotcha. If it's all the same to you, I'd like to come in the side entrance. Well, certainly, yes, that would be preferable, I think. I'll leave a key card on top of the reader of the north entrance. It'll work to get in. I'll program it to. Room 113. Yes, thank you again, Detective. This is very much appreciated. Not a problem. Foley half lied before ending the call. Gerard Reese. Despite the pity Ed Foley had for the guy, he was still pissed off at how he had handled himself since the death of his brother. The shit had started at the wake and had been going on for over 2 years, on and off. The guy was half in the bottle to begin with, and after Rob's death, he crawled the rest of the way in, hung some paintings, and put out a mailbox outside. The grief that Gerard felt at the funeral had morphed into anger by the time the wake was going, thanks in no small part to the open bar. He had confronted Foley a half hour in, quietly at first, telling Foley that he was responsible for Robert's death, that he knew it was a case of negligence, and that he may as well have put a bullet in Rob himself. Later, this escalated into shouting and posturing, and Gerard was removed by some family friends, so as to not further create a scene. In the subsequent years, there had been other incidents, scores of drunken phone calls and voicemail messages, a few letters, and poorly concealed card tales. Then there was the night at the Royal Hotel. The Royal was what the inactive construction zone where Detective Reese met his end eventually became. A mid-level traveler's hotel somewhere between a Days Inn and a budget Marriott. Gerard checked into room 113 and spent his day drinking and sobbing. By midnight, he was pissed, shouting and wailing, in an apparent conversation with his deceased brother. The frightened receptionist called the police, who came and had to physically restrain Gerard before detaining him and letting him sit 2 days in a holding cell. The officer on the scene had contacted Foley about the incident, so he went to the Royal Inn, personally paid for the damages to the room, and gave the management his personal cell phone number, insisting that they call him if another such incident had ever occurred. Foley sat down at the wheel of his Nissan Sentra, rubbed his eyes and sighed before starting the engine. He had his shield on him, but unhooked his holster and slid it under the driver's seat in favor of a powerful, close-range stun gun that he hung from his belt. He hoped to hell he didn't have to use it and could simply talk Gerard down, maybe even drive him back to his house. If Foley was lucky, Gerard would be less angry and more maudlin by the time he arrived to confront him. That happened from time to time. The detective had been anticipating something like this for the last 2 weeks, as the signs were growing harder to ignore. The phone calls, either silent or containing an ear-splitting electronic tone, had been coming in more frequently, and just 2 days prior, he had received a letter written in an almost unintelligible and splotched ink. The pages appeared to have blood smeared across them, and the only words that Foley could decipher had been brother, murder, the truth, get even, square up, and cocksucker. Also included in the package had been a photo taken from the crime scene, showing Robert Reese's body slumped against the wall. God knows how he got his hands on that. All signs were pointing to another confrontation. Driving across town, Foley came to a familiar intersection with a notoriously long red light. He was reminded of the long minutes sitting in the Nissan, or a cruiser with Reese, waiting for the light to change. One of Detective Reese's favorite low-stakes bets to make used to happen at this traffic light. Every time the two were stopped, he would flick the radio to the nearest station playing a song, and he'd bet whether the light would turn green before the song ended. 2 or 3 days before his death, Reese made such a bet while riding with Foley. The car rolled to the already red light that day, and as it came to a full stop, Robert Reese flicked the radio station to one of the presets and simultaneously said, $10 the light screen before the song ends. Foley replied, "Okay, you're on." The two waited silently, eyes fixated on the traffic light as Lady Gaga rhythmically explained her poker face at great length. As the chorus repeated for the last time, the green light shone, and Reese bellowed a triumphant laugh. "Ha ha, $10, man. Pay up." "No way. That was the end of the song." "Oh, it's still going." "It was fading out. That doesn't count. It was over." "Oh, you know the rules, Ed." "Ah, we're coming back this way later. We'll go again if the light's red." "Whatever, man. You're just a sore loser." "We'll square up. Later." The light was green when they came through later that day, and there was no bet. As they partners were leaving the station that evening, Foley said, "I swiped my Metro card for you at the turnstile, so we're even now." "That was only a $2 swipe. The bet was 10, Robert retorted. "No, man, we're even." In reply, Reese merely sighed and rolled his eyes. This wasn't the first time Foley welched on a bet. Now Foley's radio was off. The light was green almost 5 seconds before he realized it and continued driving. Part 3, 29th of March, 2012, 1:55 a.m. The Nissan pulled into the side parking lot of the Royal Hotel, taking a space several spots from the building. Looking at the structure, Foley could still envision it as it had been. Half-finished, windows haphazardly boarded up, sawhorses and piles of dried cement scattered about. Now it looked like the perfect place to pull in and rest your family when your wife refused to sleep at her in-laws' house. Cable televisions bolted to the wall and off-brand chocolates wrapped and sitting on the pillows. Stepping out of the car, Foley pushed the old memories of the building from his mind. He'd have the rest of his life to think about all that. Stalling only momentarily, he opened his car door and retrieved his piece. He didn't feel right without it. He strolled around to the north side entrance and saw a maroon and white card with thick black stripe on one side sitting on top of the exterior card reader. The number 113 was written on it in black marker. The detective swiped the card, striped first through the reader, which blinked green, and clicked as the lock disengaged. He entered. Opening the interior door and turning down the corridor, he felt the commercial-grade carpet scratch against the soles of his boots. Down the hall on the left he would find the door to 113. The buzzing in his pocket stopped him, and he plucked his cell phone from his trousers. Gerard's number was displayed on the screen. With a pained sigh, he answered it. "Gerard," he said flatly. No reply. "Gerard, stop bullshitting. I'm about 15 steps from your door. Let's just..." He was cut off by the voice on the other end of the line. "You're where? What the fuck are you doing here?" "The hotel called. They said you were causing a disturbance. Yet again." "So you came all the way over to my house. What for?" "No, I'm not. I'm at the hotel." "Well, that makes one of us." "Cut the shit, Gerard. I just got a call that you were causing trouble here." "Well, I left about 2, maybe 3 hours ago." Gerard slurred. "Ran out of gin. Besides, alone in a hotel's room, no way to spend a birthday. Alone at home's a different story." He trailed off. "So you're not here? You're not at the hotel, Gerard?" "No. Thank God. The last thing I want to see right now is the cocksucker that killed my brother." He was choking up. "All right, fine, listen. Even if it's your birthday, just try to take it easy, okay? Gerard chuckled through his sobs. "Ain't my birthday." Then the call dropped. Foley was sure now that there had been some miscommunication. Gerard had been here, but he was gone now, so there was no reason for him not to drive back home and try to have a quiet night. He'd probably have to pay for some more damages to the room, but that could wait until tomorrow. He leaned against the near wall, closing his eyes and rubbing them with his thumb and middle finger, thinking about how exhausted he suddenly felt. When he opened his eyes again, the hallway was unexpectedly dim. The overhead fluorescence had gone out. The only light was coming from an emergency unit on the wall. After a few seconds, that light went out as well, leaving the corridor illuminated only by the pale moonlight coming in from the far window. Foley's sense of alarm was dampened by his fatigue and curiosity. He took a step down the hall, then another. On the next step, his feet kicked into something. He knelt down to get a better look, using the screen of his phone for additional light. Shoes. He had almost tripped over a pair of shoes. Inky black and shiny in the dim light. Oxfords. He stared at the footwear for nearly a minute, puzzled that he hadn't seen them before. Finally, he stood upright, still looking at the Oxfords in the dark. A sound issued from down the hallway, a crack, followed by a loud sizzle. He gazed up and saw an incredibly bright flame, dancing and spitting pink sparks. It was a road flare laying on the carpet. Another crack, and another. The scent of acrid smoke filled the hall, combined with the dank metallic smell of burnt magnesium. After a minute, there were 5 signal flares dotting the hallway floor, spitting and sizzling wildly, bathing the walls in a rosy glow. Detective Foley felt drawn along by the flares, leading him to the end of the hall, to room 113. When he had walked the length of the corridor, he turned to see where the door to 113 should have been, but there was simply an empty, unfurnished frame. Next to the frame, the room number was written on a scrap of masking tape. The guest room beyond the threshold was visible only due to the light reflected from the flares and the screen of a discarded cell phone. He stepped into the darkness of the room. What he stepped into was not what he had expected to see. The room seemed to be sort of an amalgamation of reality and memory. The floor of the room was unfinished plywood, coated with gray dust and footprints. The walls were covered with a flat white primer, screw and nail heads poking through in some parts. There were no light fixtures, no outlets nor switches. However, elements from the current state of room 113 remained. A flat panel TV hung on the far wall, its power cable dangling. There were 2 nondescript landscape paintings and a full-body mirror hanging as well. In the center of the near wall sat a queen-size bed, fully tucked and made up, but coated with the dust that lay over almost every surface. Edward Foley looked around the area, blinking his eyes in hopes that they would open and show him a sight of which he could make sense of. When he was just about to turn and run from the enigmatic sight, he heard a voice call to him. It reverberated closely, as if in a small, unfinished space. "Edward, it's nice to see you again." Given the strange turn of events, Foley was not as surprised by this as he would have imagined. He replied, "Rob? That's you, isn't it?" "I wouldn't bet against it, partner." Out of the darkest corner of room 113 walked a figure. It was dressed in gray slacks and a blazer over a white shirt. A paisley tie hung from its neck. It wore argyle socks with no shoes. It approached the detective slowly. "Rob, what's going—" Before he could finish the thought, A signal flare from the hall rolled into the room, ignoring all suggestions of physics. It spewed forth a violent bright white fuchsia glow, illuminating the figure's features. It was the figure of Detective Robert Reese, and like the room itself, he contained elements both old and new, familiar and foreign. His form was in a constant state of flux. Splotches of decay and rot danced across his body, only to give way to fresh living tissue. A mixture of pale, dead, and healthy pink flesh was oozing across his face, each side giving and taking in an endlessly nauseating dance of convulsed fusion. This paradox also extended to the rest of his head, the top left of which was shifting between a healthy hair-covered scalp and a gaping bloody maw of fractured bone and tissue. Noting Detective Edward Foley's confusion and disgust, the form of Robert Reese gave a polite-sounding laugh, and then he spoke. Ed, let's not screw around with pleasantries and teary-eyed reunions. I'd bet that the way you see me now, you wouldn't be too eager for a brotherly embrace, or even a handshake." He laughed again, more heartily. "Besides, I'm pretty sure we both know what this little reacquaintance is about." "Robert, what's going on?" "Forget it, partner. I pondered it for a while, and trust me, it's not worth it. Just accept that what you and I have right now is a rather unique opportunity that is not afforded to many. I want to take a proverbial trip down memory lane, if you will." Foley swallowed hard and nodded his acknowledgement. "Great," shouted Reese. "I'd just like you to take a look out that doorway behind you." Foley slowly turned to face the doorframe. On the floor in front of him was another form, not quite corporeal, but there. It was the form of Albert Goshen, kneeling down with a flare in each hand, moaning and grunting. A voice comes from the corridor beyond. "All right, we'll do this the hard way," shouts Foley's own voice. "Lay flat on the floor with your arms spread out to your sides. We're coming in." A second later, the figure of Detective Reese spins into the doorway with his weapon drawn and crouches, as another figure, that of Foley himself, turns into view merely a moment later. In that moment, the form of Albert Goshen strikes two flares against each other, lunges forward, tossing one sparking flare just past Reese's head, and stabbing ahead with the other, jamming the flaming end into the detective's hand. Reese drops his weapon and staggers back a step. Goshen's eyes hungrily take in the sight of Detective's service piece clattering on the floor. But he doesn't skip a beat in pulling two more road flares from his pants waistband and striking them together. He hurls them both at Reese's face, then rolls across the floor, grabbing the detective's discarded Glock. At this point, Reese has staggered out of the room, pushing Foley back into the hall and knocking him off of his feet. Goshen leaps out of the room while tossing another lit flare. Foley, regaining his balance, lunges through the confusion of sparks, smoke, and mayhem into room 113. Thinking that Goshen is still inside. When he realizes his error, he turns back to the hall, piece drawn, only to see Robert being held in front of Goshen, being used as a human shield. He's got Robert Reese's weapon jammed against its owner's temple. "Don't you fucking move. Don't you dare fucking move, or I'll paint the walls with his brains," screams Albert Goshen, violently jerking Reese's body back and forth. Foley's service piece is trained on Goshen's head at a range of 8 feet. "Drop your fucking weapon. Drop it now and release the detective," bellows Foley, no tremor of fear in his voice. "Do it. Do it now, or I'll fire." "Don't you fuck with me, man. You shoot me, and I shoot him." "You wanna bet?" At that moment, several things happen. Albert Goshen turned his stolen weapon towards Foley. Reese started to turn to disarm him, and Foley fired a shot. Foley's round was intended for Goshen, but in the struggle, Reese was pushed in its way. The top of Detective Reese's head exploded into a shower of blood, brain matter, and skull fragments, and he immediately dropped against the wall and fell to the floor. Goshen and Foley were both stunned by what had happened, but Foley was the first to regain his bearings. "Motherfucker!" he screamed and popped off several rounds, puncturing Goshen's abdomen and chest cavity, as well as tearing off a large portion of his neck, severing his jugular. Goshen dropped to the floor with a wet thump. There was silence except for the hiss of the burning flares. Foley stood there for several moments, arms outstretched before blinking and seemingly returning to reality. "Oh shit," he muttered. "Oh shit." He holstered his weapon and checked on the fallen lumps of humanity. Both dead, one a low-life scumbag, and the other his partner, laying together in a sick embrace of seeping crimson, shining black and purple in the glow of the flares. Without delay, Foley heaved the body of Goshen back toward the doorway and lay him down. He picked up Reese's Glock by the barrel, wrapped the fingers of his one-time suspect around the handle, and squeezed a few more rounds into the rapidly cooling body of his partner. Each shot made him jiggle in a manner that would have been comical in other circumstances. Foley further smeared and obscured the blood on the floor and walls, trying to cover his tracks by souring the crime scene. Then he got on his knees, flicked the power on his radio, and called into the station dispatch. He explained his quickly fabricated story, then sat in room 113, weeping and watching his partner's argyle socks soaking up congealing blood. The image of the scene faded, and the characters vanished, leaving the room empty aside from Detective Foley and the amorphous apparition of his friend and partner. Foley was weeping again. "I was always waiting for your recklessness to bite you in the ass," stated Reese, breaking the silence. "I just never thought I'd get bitten too, and I wouldn't have cared so much if you hadn't covered it up so that you could keep your paycheck. But I didn't deserve that. I didn't deserve to be the ante in one of your inane bets." I was certain," began Foley. "I knew I could have made that shot. If he hadn't moved, if you hadn't made to disarm him, I could have made that shot." Reese's half-ruined head swung back at this, and he began laughing. His laughter had a wet, gurgling tone to it. When he finally composed himself, he spoke. "So I see. It was my fault that you missed your insane shot and I got my brains blow out. Oh, I see it so clearly now, despite lacking an eye and half my head. The one that was shredded when your bullet crashed into my skull. I suppose I ought to apologize, huh?" Foley stared in awe, tears welling in his eyes. "Well, please accept my sincerest apologies, partner. I'm terribly sorry that I made you kill me, then blame it on some lunatic pedophile. I'm sorry that my brother has been such an inconvenience to you in the past years. It was certainly selfish of me to cause you such grief." Reese's fake smile had curled into a scowl. "Reese, please," Foley struggled. "It's not, it wasn't like that." His plea went unheard. "I'll tell you what, Ed. All things considered, I'm in a good mood today. I mean, after all, it isn't every day you get to take in a show with an old pal, especially when you're in my condition." Tears of terror and regret spilled from Foley's eyes. "There's no need to cry anymore. In fact," the smile returned to his face, "it's a day for celebration. Did you know that today was, or is, my birthday?" Edward Foley remembered his exchange with Gerard Reese from earlier. He had mentioned a birthday. The detective couldn't recall if he had ever known his partner's birthday, or if he had simply forgotten. And since it's a special day for me, I want to share my happiness with you, friend. I'd like to make a wager. I know neither of us could ever turn down a good bet. I'd like to see you put your money where your mouth is. I'd like to see you make the shot that you missed. The detective gaped at the form of his ex-partner. Rob, I don't think... But he was cut off. No, I insist. Without warning, the apparition of Reese had swooped behind Foley. It had an icy hand gripped on one of his arms, the other around his throat. You've got your piece, I assume. In response, Foley used his free hand to draw his weapon. Excellent. Reese whirled the detective around the confusing hotel room and faced him toward the full-length mirror hanging on the wall. This must look familiar to you, huh, Ed? Reese was holding Foley much as Goshen had held Reese back then, his head peeking out from above Foley's shoulder. Take aim, partner. Foley raised his weapon and took aim toward the mirror. He trained his sight on the reflection of his former partner, miserably readying himself to fire upon him again. As he was about to pull the trigger, Reese wrenched his body back and forth, breaking the man's concentration. I wouldn't want to be unfair. I just want to recreate the situation as accurately as possible. He continued to turn and pull Foley back and forth, muddying the detective's aim. After a moment, Foley simply closed his eyes and let his weapon do its own aiming. He choked a sob and fired. The sound of glass shattering filled his ears, echoing over and over itself, mixing with the fizzing of the flares. Foley felt himself violently pulling forward, spinning, and then suddenly all was still. He opened his eyes at last. What he saw was the room he had just been in with his partner, but appearing as though shattered and put back together. Through the shards and cracks he saw his own form, staring back at him. The doppelganger figure looking at him leaned in close, smirked, and straightened his tie. Not bad, Ed. A very admirable try. I guess you just weren't as lucky as you thought you were. But don't feel bad about it. I don't. Some bets you win and others you lose. And as far as it goes between you and I, now we're even. Foley watched through shattered eyes as the man in his body turned and walked out of room 113. Edward Foley closed his eyes and faded into the withering darkness.